The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here. Folks, we're about to enter year 15 of DM Radio. I had to count it again in my head just to make sure that's true. Yes, it's true. We've been learning about data for a long time. And 15 years ago, I knew this industry would be hot. I knew it was never going to stop being interesting because data is so powerful and we live in the information economy. So data drives the information economy. Really, analytics to a large extent drives the information economy these days. But data is a crucial part of every operation. And today's topic is really very cool stuff. We're going to talk about as a service. So obviously, in the old days, we had data centers. We went out and bought a lot of computers, stood up the operating systems, stood up all the technology, all the software to run our business. Way back when, and even today, we use mainframes as the cornerstone of all that. But what's happening now is the cloud is just everywhere and it's dominating. And you've got this cloud first mentality from many of the new companies that are coming out there. Now, that doesn't mean data centers are going away. I think that the rumors of the data centers' demise are greatly exaggerated. There's going to be a long tail to data centers, but nonetheless, software as a service is the new model. It's the new standard. It's a sort of de facto way of doing business. Almost everybody understands that. I'm a little surprised that it took as long as it did. From our perspective, it was about 3 and 4 years ago that cloud got very serious. And frankly, I credit a company named Microsoft with helping to make that happen. Because when Microsoft pivoted, when Satya Nadella said we're going all in on cloud on Azure, that really turned heads and got the business world at large recognizing that this is more than just a fad. This is the direction things are going to be going. We need to focus on this. And another company that has done a really good job over the years of occasionally doing an assessment and then pivoting and then executing in their new vision is a company called Dell. Of course, out of Austin, Texas originally, Michael Dell, out of his dorm room, launched this company years ago. I have a good friend of mine, our producer, as a matter of fact, ran a computer company selling computers way back in the 90s. And Dell came along and kind of gave him a hard time, let's just say. They took it to scale and they changed the game fundamentally for how business gets done. But Dell has once again done that. And now they're going with this as a service model. Everything you want can be purchased as a service, which is a very, very different ballgame from where we've been in the past. So today we'll be talking to Kevin Liebl and Alyson Langon, both of Dell, about this as a service model. What does it mean for you? How can you take advantage? How does it change things? Not just the financial side of things, but the processes, the workflows, your strategic planning, the whole 9 yards. So with that, let's bring in our first guest, Kevin Liebl. Welcome to DM Radio. Kevin, tell us a bit about yourself, your history in this industry and where you see things going now at Dell.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, I joined Dell about 2 years ago, but prior to that, I was with 2 other storage as a service companies. So I've been in this space for about 7-8 years now. And my role here at Dell is to help pivot the company toward as a service. And, you know, it's a great time to be here because this is a very active space and the market is clearly making the pivot toward as a service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are lots of benefits here. I think one of my favorite, if you get right down to it, is a much lower barrier to entry. Right? In the old days with the data center, if you have to stand up the servers, stand up all the software, do everything, in and of itself, that is a significant hurdle to overcome. And as such, it's a barrier. It's a barrier to innovation. It's a barrier to agility, to changing things, doing things differently. And now when you lower that bar to where you can just rent some space to play around with your idea, that's extremely liberating in terms of innovation, in terms of changing the direction of business. And that's pretty important in this marketplace. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing everything. And I've been in technology for longer than I want to admit, multiple decades, let's say that. And so for many decades, we've been dealing with the forklift upgrade, the 3 to 5 year cycle of hardware technology and having to replace it. And as you say, the barrier to entry is high. And with as a service, it really is a utility. You can sign up, start using the amounts you need. You don't have to over provision. You pay for what you use. And I think particularly in the new world that we live in today with COVID, no one knows what the world's going to look like in 6, 9, 12 months. And so that level of uncertainty is causing a lot of companies to rethink how they want to procure IT resources. Investing in millions of dollars of assets that they may not need, depending on how their business grows or shrinks, just doesn't make sense anymore. And so the traditional hurdle of over provisioning or under provisioning or tech refresh cycles now are even more dominant because of the new world we live in. I think the other area is a lot of companies just want to get assets off the balance sheet and get out of the infrastructure business. So the thought of being able to treat the IT resource procurement as OpEx from an accounting treatment standpoint is very appealing.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. And again, getting back to agility, companies need to try new things these days. I mean, with first the tariffs, so we had a pretty good early warning sign that things were going to be a bit disruptive in supply chain and other areas. And then of course, COVID, what happened? We saw a tremendous change in consumer behavior, which drove tremendous disruption in the enterprise and small business. All sorts of avenues of change just kind of erupted all around us. And so companies had to reconfigure, they had to reassess, they had to look at where the profit's coming from. We just talked about that today in another call. You had to figure out, all right, well, if everything is different now, how can I leverage my corporate DNA, our strengths in this new world to do new and interesting things, or at least to focus more on what generates profit and what makes us special. And this as a service model is custom made for that kind of agility, that kind of maneuverability, right, Kevin?
Yeah, I like analogies. And when I think about agility, I think about traditional utilities that we're all familiar with. I'm sitting here in my home office looking at an electrical outlet, and I don't have to think about how much electricity I'm going to need over the next 6 months and forecast. I don't have to purchase a bulk unit of electricity and then make sure I use all of it so that it's efficient. We just take for granted that electricity or water or our cellular phones, it wasn't that long ago that we did have to think about our cellular phones in terms of pricing plans, and you didn't want overage fees and so forth. All of that basically went away, and now it's unlimited usage. You just pay for what you use, right? And so that ability to be flexible is really important. And so to your point with agility, yeah, as the world changes, as the markets change at a faster pace, companies need that flexibility to be agile and adjust and not end up over or under provisioning or wasting assets in the process.
And one of the topics that I know has been a hot one for our audience is sovereignty, data sovereignty. There are these desires amongst many people to get into the public cloud for the cost savings, to leverage what's available out there. But there's also a desire for private cloud, right? And we have to understand that hybrid cloud is a reality. But the sovereignty concept and even data ownership explicitly is an interesting topic, right? It's an interesting topic from a regulatory perspective, but also just from an organizational workflow perspective as well. What do you think about data sovereignty as a component to your planning, your strategic planning for data and how you treat data in your organization?
Yeah, when you think about all of the options for deployment, it's not a binary world. It's an and world. And so what a lot of companies are doing is they're looking at workloads and they're determining based on workload, where should that workload reside? And there's a lot of benefits to the public cloud. That flexibility of leveraging AWS or Azure or Google or Alibaba or any of them to provide the resources and somebody else takes care of it. But there's a lot of workloads that just don't work in the public cloud. Data sovereignty is a big one. Not knowing exactly where your data lives. There's a lot of, especially in the EU, that require data to be within country, and Canada is another big one. So you need to know where that data lives, and the cleanest way to do that is to put it in your data center. So on-prem as a service makes a lot of sense. There's, as you said, regulatory or legal reasons. The example I use a lot with our sales forces here in the US, law enforcement body-worn cameras. Great application for the public cloud. Lots of assets, video grows rapidly. It's unpredictable how much they're going to need. Most law enforcement environments don't have a lot of budget to go build infrastructure. They don't have IT expertise to manage all that infrastructure. So on first glance, you'd say perfect for the public cloud. But the reality is, if you put that video in the public cloud, you break chain of custody, and it's inadmissible in court. So the video has to be in the local data center, locked up, so that they can prove chain of custody. So on-prem as a service, where someone else is still taking care of all the infrastructure, all the upgrades, the management, et cetera, and that application is simply using the capacity, works really, really well in that environment. So there's a lot of examples like that where the public cloud, great for certain workloads, but in other cases, you may want it on-prem, in a colo. It's a hybrid world, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be, right? Another topic I want to kind of get into is the whole cost structure. I heard a great quote, this is a couple of years ago now, someone was joking, and again, this is a few years ago, I should say, probably 3 or 4. Someone joked that the most ungoverned line in your IT budget spend was your AWS bill, because back then it could just explode. I mean, something happened, a long running query, or something wasn't designed properly, or someone wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden you thought you were saving money and you're way over budget in a very short period of time. How do you deal with that at Dell? Do you have any safeguards or guardrails, or how do you deal with costs as they come monthly, incrementally, and giving your clients the ability to sort of tamp down when needed?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, calculating the costs can be really challenging, and you're right, the public cloud is known for that. There's a whole cottage industry of vendors who help manage AWS costs, for example. Part of the issue there are things like egress fees. And so when you're on-prem, you don't have egress fees. And so there's a number of elements architecturally that are different that impact the cost. But I think the biggest challenge for customers when they're looking at any of these models is looking at the long-term cost of ownership. And if you're simply comparing the acquisition cost, you're missing the bigger picture. So for example, if you're comparing CapEx to as a service, typically in a CapEx world, you're gonna buy a big box and you're gonna over provision. But in an OpEx world, in an as a service world, you're gonna start very small because you can, and you grow into it. So you have immediate savings day one, but then you've got the bursty nature of the workloads. And so as your utilization goes up and goes down, you've got those savings. And so that'll occur over time. You can eliminate the finance and procurement process, because in the old world, when you acquire new capacity, you're going to have to go through the procurement department and look at vendors and get quotes and redline contracts and blah, blah, blah. Now, you just expand your LUN or your file system and your bill adjusts. Done. So the internal finance teams and procurement teams become advocates. They love this model. But my point is, you really have to look at it over the long term to see the true value of an as a service model.
Yeah, and there are lots of considerations too. You know, I think the key, and I'm sure this is happening at many companies right now, is, as you suggest, to take that very thoughtful, reasoned assessment of where we are, where we're going, how big a role does data play in our organization? What is that data pipeline going to look like going forward? And really make some hard decisions about how to balance all that out. But that is the key, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And again, back to agility. I like analogies. And so one of the analogies I use a lot is you think about your car, and wouldn't it be nice to have a car that's a minivan during the week when you're taking your kids to school, and it's an SUV on the weekend when you're going to the lake or the beach with the family, and it's a sports sedan or it's a luxury vehicle when you're going out to dinner. That's what as a service is. You can change the personality of your resources. You also don't pay for it when it's sitting in the garage. You don't pay for the maintenance. You know, all of that is taken care of by somebody else.
We, of course, have these data centers all over the place. They're not going away anytime soon. But some companies are being pretty aggressive about migrating away from the on-prem environment and going up into the cloud. It's going to be really interesting. I think hybrid cloud is here forever. I mean, quite frankly, I joke that we went from discussing hybrid cloud to multi-cloud in about a month, because everyone realized, you know, it's not going to be just on-prem in one cloud. There are going to be multiple clouds. That's not going to change. I think that we are going to see a greater effort on the different cloud providers to enable collaboration across these environments, because the customers want that. Quite frankly, the customers are going to dictate that. And if you don't go down that road, you're probably going to have some issues. Now, Kevin did mention egress fees. That's certainly a very real concern to this day. You got to watch out for that. But as a service, it's the new way of doing things, and it's not in just one particular industry or one vertical, if you will, one aspect of business. It's all over the place. Compute, storage, the whole kit and caboodle. So next up, we have Alyson Langon of Dell. Tell us a bit about what you're working on these days and how you're helping your customers navigate to this rather different dynamic of as a service.
Sure, thanks for having me. So Alyson Langon, I'm the Director of Offer Marketing for As a Service offerings at Dell. I've been, I started my career in tech about 9 years ago, started at EMC, and then, of course, to your earlier point of Dell, knowing where things are going and how to pivot, I was, I was there when that merger and acquisition took place. And so I've continued with the company, and now joined the Apex initiative to start driving it and pivoting the company to deliver, our portfolio as a service to our customers.
Yeah, so you've seen from the inside some of the big transformations taking place. And this, of course, is another very, very significant transformation. So I guess I'd be curious to know, what are some insights you can offer from your client experiences, from working with folks and helping them make these decisions to take a different trajectory? What are some of the considerations that come up in your conversations when you talk to folks? How do you shape the conversation and make sure they're on the right track?
Sure. So it's a good question. I think, there are a few different aspects to this in terms of making the shift. And it's still an emerging market in some ways. So, we're jumping in the right time, listening and sort of responding to what our customers have been asking for. And, obviously, like the financial element is a big part of it, being able to have a desire to shift to more of an OpEx versus CapEx type model. And if that's something our customers are looking for, they want to, pay for their revenue generating infrastructure as they're actually realizing that revenue versus having to make a big capital expenditure up front. And then in addition to shifting to the OpEx model, having it be consumption based. So aligning their, having a desire to align their expenses to actual usage. We talked a little bit about just the unpredictability in general, and particularly like the unpredictable world we live in these days. And they don't know what their, IT doesn't know what their needs are going to be from a storage, compute, et cetera, perspective, like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. And so rather than wanting to make a large capital, investment up front, shifting this model aligns with their needs to be able to manage that unpredictability and align, their expenses with the actual usage and what they actually need. The other piece is there's like the human element as well, the IT staffing. Certain businesses are either, IT constrained, or they want to be able to focus on more value added activities. And they see, managing and maintaining, upgrading infrastructure as, a burden, where they want to be focusing more on innovation, and being able to take that, off of their plate and have someone do it for them is a huge value, especially when you have either limited resources or just not the appropriate skills to do those types of activities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I like the way you brought in this concept of figuring out which compute, which storage is directly contributing to your revenue model, and then being able to base your pricing on that. So you know how much is coming in, you know what to allocate. That's a wildly different calculation than we were used to in the on-prem days, right? Because you did have to over-provision. We saw all sorts of fascinating innovations over the years to deal with that. Virtualization in and of itself, right, was designed at optimizing the use of those boxes and those machines and so forth. But like we really do live in this area of specialty, or this era, I should say, of specialization. And you got to know what you are really good at doing. And let's face it, the big providers are good at building the data centers that you can then rent. So you, as a business person, you want to focus on what you're really good at doing. And that's, I think, what you spoke to a moment ago about innovation. If you're going to change what you're doing, you can't be worried about, keeping all the boxes lit and working properly. You don't want to have to add that sort of cumbersome task to the array of things you have to do, right, Alyson?
Right, exactly. I mean, it goes back to the analogy Kevin used around utilities. It's, what's the outcome you need to be able to deliver what you need to do for your business to maximize your business outcomes. Like, this is how much capacity I need to, for my data. This is how much performance I need to be able to run my application and manage my workload. I need some file storage based on, what I'm trying to accomplish. And that's all you need to think about. And then it's just there for you to utilize as you need it. You don't have to worry about where it's coming from, are upgrades being done, is it being maintained? All of that headache is taken off your plate.
Yeah, that's important stuff. And I think that what you're going to see here is the staff in large organizations who were managing the data centers, incrementally, those folks are going to be focused on understanding what the cloud providers offer, right? I mean, that's a big part of the game, is just knowing what's in the portfolio, what can I get access to, and really staying on top of that, because it changes all the time, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think, there are certain workloads that are going to be a fit for public cloud. It does have its benefits. They're constantly innovating. There's a lot of services available, but, I think there's also the challenge. There are customers, we saw this sort of cloud first, everyone's running to the cloud, and there are some great benefits there, but you also don't want to necessarily get too dependent on a single vendor. We talked about things like egress fees and the difficulty and cost associated with just trying to move data, and going all in with one public cloud vendor creates a certain amount of lock-in. With on-prem as a service, you're able to maintain that control of your data. But if you still want to take advantage of the public cloud, we have deployment options, either on premises in your own data center, but you can also leverage co-location facilities that are often adjacent to public cloud providers as well. So if you're trying to access some of those services, we, as a, on-prem or private cloud as a service, unlocks the possibility to take advantage of whatever public cloud services you want from any provider you want, without having your data locked into one of those clouds.
Lock-in is a huge issue. And what's just kind of jumping into my mind here as we're talking about all this is the fact that 20 years ago or so, or 25 years ago, you would have to go out and get specialized hardware to achieve certain tasks. If you wanted to do heavy duty data mining, for example, you couldn't just do that on your laptop. You had to go out and get the heavy duty machinery and stay on top of what was possible. But what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, especially, is a commoditization of compute and a commoditization of storage. And so if they're commodities now, you don't have to worry about trying to understand the latest box that's come down the pike. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. You know that you can just grab it from your provider as and when you need it. So, I mean, that gets back to agility, it gets back to CapEx versus OpEx, and it gets back to really just having your team focus on what are the business processes, what are the workflows that you need to support, and you want to make sure you support them in a bulletproof and impervious way. And that's the key, right? If all this stuff is as a service, it really changes the game on how you think about what you're doing, how you innovate, where you're going. I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is it's kind of old habits die hard. So how do you sort of drive that message home and get the aha moment with your clients? Kevin,
if I can chime in on that one.
Go ahead.
It's a really good point because it's a change of mindset. And that's the biggest challenge that both the vendors and the end users have in this model, is just rethinking what's possible. And I'll give you an example. A lot of companies want to act like a service provider. And so to your point earlier, it's less about the product, it's about the service level. And so when a marketing department or an engineering department or finance department comes to IT and says, hey, I need 100 terabytes, can I get it in the next hour? Traditionally, you wouldn't be able to do that, but now you can. And so companies are starting to act like a service provider and just providing the resources as they need them and then turning them off when they're no longer necessary. But the other piece of it is charging the departments for what they need. So, bill back to the individual department, whether it's manufacturing, finance, marketing, sales, for what they use, instead of peanut butter spreading a percentage across everyone. So it's about the service level, and it's less about the underlying infrastructure. As long as they're providing the compute, the storage, et cetera, at the level of performance and reliability that the user needs, the underlying infrastructure becomes less relevant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the other side of the equation here is that we talk a lot about data science these days and artificial intelligence and machine learning. These are compute heavy processes. And if you want to leverage that kind of thing, again, you don't want to have to go out and buy 10, 20, 30 boxes or something and set up that whole stack. And oh my goodness gracious, it's a bit of a nightmare to even think about. So now, again, with this as a service model, it enables you, I'll throw it over to Alyson first, to capitalize on these new capabilities. Because as I look at the data science industry and I look at the maturation of communities around R and Python and so forth, we can do amazing things today very, very quickly, design them on your laptop even, then scale it out to production. And to be able to leverage that in a short period of time is a huge change in the marketplace. And I think it's very promising. And frankly, it's just in time. But what do you think, Alyson?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. And, we keep using the words agility and flexibility, but that really sums up like just how quickly you can start spinning up these high, compute intensive type workloads and just using the resources you need when you need them. I mean, the value in that is, huge. Things like life sciences and, genome processing and these are types of workloads that are a great fit for this type of model where you need a bunch of compute for a specific amount of time. I mean, other examples are, media and entertainment. You want to use the compute and storage while you're running your project, but then being able to turn it off when you're done.
Well, folks, look these guys up online, Kevin Liebl and Alyson Langon, Dell Technologies, Apex, that's the new solution. It's everything as a service, folks. It is the future. It's the way things are going to be done. And it's good news for all of us in the business world because we want to get cool stuff done and make some money. And with that, we'll bid you farewell, folks.